Investigation of human rights abuse in Ukrainian orphanages. Our speakers are Erik, Deputy Head of DRI, Halyna Kurylo, Director of DRI-Ukraine, and Halyna Postolyuk, Director of the Ukrainian branch of Hope and Homes for Children Charity. Vasylyna Dybailo, Director of Partnership for Every Child Charity, Larysa Samsonova, Chairwoman of the Board of Rodyna Family Social Rehabilitation Center. We are going to have partially this briefing in English, so please take your headphones and receivers. We are going to start now.
Today, I'm Erik Matthews, the Associate Director of Disability Rights International, or DRI, and today we are releasing our latest human rights report. It's titled No Way Home: The Exploitation and Abuse of Children in Ukraine's Orphanages. DRI has focused our efforts on documenting the human rights situation of the most vulnerable population in any society. And we find that is children and adults who are segregated away from society in orphanages and other residential institutions. Behind closed doors, horrendous abuses can take place. Our investigation has revealed particularly shocking human rights abuses in Ukraine's institutions. It's important to note that in our report, we also include the concerns of children who do not have disabilities in Ukraine's orphanages. And the reason for this is that research has shown and has been very clear in that being raised in an institution creates disability. The simple fact of being raised in congregate care and being forced to grow up in such conditions that are present there cause children to become developmentally delayed, and they are often not supported to develop the skills that they need to function independently in society. DRI's report is timed to coincide with the United Nations review on April 20th of Ukraine's implementation of the UN Convention on the Rights of Persons with Disabilities, which Ukraine has ratified. The convention explicitly calls for the community integration of children with disabilities with community services and supports equal to others. The UN guidelines on the guidelines for alternatives to care for children call for the progressive elimination of institutions. The main findings of DRI's report are as follows. There are at least 82,000 children in Ukraine's orphanages. However, we found that government and NGO estimates vary widely, and it is unlikely that anyone knows the true number of children in the orphanages. The lack of oversight creates serious risk for exploitation, disappearances, and trafficking. One former orphanage resident interviewed by DRI told us that every year 10 to 12 orphanages would disappear from the institution. We found that most children with disabilities in Ukraine's institutions face a lifetime of segregation from society when they are shuttled from orphanage to adult social care home to nursing home. And those with mild or no disabilities who may be lucky enough to graduate from orphanages around the age of 16, however, our investigation found that because young adults receive almost no support in transitioning to independent living, that they end up on the streets, committing crimes or entering prostitution in order just to survive. We have found that orphanage graduates on the streets are at very high risk of being ensnared into sex trafficking or forced prostitution. We have found that there is an especially high risk of trafficking in war-torn areas where staff have fled orphanages and kids have been left to fend for themselves. DRI in every institution that it's visited has documented, in nearly every institution, has documented extensive labor trafficking within institutions, and interviews with former orphanage residents indicate that there is also a high risk of sex and organ trafficking within institutions as well. We have found that sexual violence in institutions is commonplace. We spoke with one girl in an orphanage who told us it's better to have one boyfriend who hits you if he can protect you from all the other boys attacking you. And former residents told us that sexual violence is a cyclical act, that if they were raped as children, they were more likely to rape younger children once they grew up. We have documented the systemic use of forced abortions in institutions to prevent sexually active residents from having children. These procedures, our investigation found, are most often performed without the consent or knowledge of the women involved. In every institution DRI visited, we witnessed extensive neglect and dangerous medical practices. The use of physical and chemical restraints to control behavior is common. In some institutions with poor staffing levels, drugs are used to sedate and control children. In several orphanages operated by the Ministry of Social Policy, DRI investigators found children who spent nearly their entire lives confined to their beds or cribs. In most cases, these children are labeled as bedridden, when in fact, the institution is simply not providing the physical therapy needed to support children to develop their mobility and independence. We've also found that international development agencies play a large role in perpetuating segregation in Ukraine's orphanages. The world is moving away from orphanages and other institutions where we know extensive neglect and horrific abuses take place. However, Ukraine is actively rebuilding its orphanages, and international donors have contributed significantly to the problem. You can renovate a building, but it's still not a home, and no matter how many coats of paint you add, atrocious abuses will still continue. In 2014, the World Bank finalized a $20 million loan agreement with the government of Ukraine to reform its system of institutional care. The program creates supports and services needed to get children without disabilities out of orphanages and into family-like settings in the community, which is a wonderful step. However, the program explicitly discriminates against children with disabilities. Instead of supporting children with disabilities to move out of orphanages like their non-disabled peers, the program instead renovates and expands institutions for children with disabilities. Even if the government of Ukraine has requested the rebuilding of orphanages for children with disabilities, the World Bank needs to be held to fundamental human rights standards. It is discrimination under international law to exclude children with disabilities from reforms. Children without disabilities under this program will be moved to loving families in the community, while children with disabilities will be sentenced to a lifetime of segregation and abuse, as we have documented, complete with an international stamp of approval. Ultimately, the government of Ukraine bears the final responsibility for protecting the human rights of its most vulnerable citizens. However, international agencies can play an outsized role in influencing reforms and must be held accountable for their actions. Thank you. And actually, I'd like to take a moment now, and Olga can pull up a video here of some of the examples of conditions that we have found in institutions.
Of volunteers, they were all used to be like these kids, and you will see them over there. Just they cannot manage to take all of them.
He's 15. He hasn't walked since his birth. She said.
Десь 23-24.
23, 24. And the equipment is
Тоже это, но вони зараз чекають обід.
So all of these girls are above 18, is that correct?
He's 23 years old, so they thought he was going to die, so they never even assessed him.
And sent him here. They did not expect him to live for such a long time.
So there's no rehabilitation, no therapy, and he hasn't had any assessment. Well, that's clearly the backboard. That's the board that they didn't want anybody to see. Where they put, obviously, the more disabled people just sitting in a room doing nothing. You know, the smell was overpowering.
Доброго дня. Ну, я думаю, що
Good morning. I believe that after watch this video, the issue of forming the internet system in Ukraine is not pressing now. This is a old system which is not cost effective. Maybe somebody has some it's useful or beneficial to somebody, and we are talking about those who work in the internet, and also indirectly it affects our life because we are the taxpayers. We partially supported because our money are used for the maintaining those closed type institutions and the human rights which are related abuse there. We are talking about the children rights, women rights, and other person rights, disabled persons. I would like to talk about the third, fourth profile of abuse of human rights, like forced labor. According to the international, let's say, concept of human trafficking, the forced labor falls under the category of human trafficking. We are talking about the orphanages or the boarding schools, especially in the countryside. They're forced to work in the farms or in the fields, and sometimes we're talking about the full hours working day. And you know that some of the children who physically are fit, nobody is going to give mercy to them for that. They use it as a labor therapy or rehabilitation. Also, there are some cases we are talking about the adult or the children of wage or young people of wage. They will be, let's say, they can leave this kind of institution in order to take care of, let's say, housekeeping, some of that, or sometimes they do that to find the partner for marriage. Sometimes they organize this kind of the dates, whatever. But formally, they give their consent. Nobody forces them to do them. But can we talk about the voluntary consent given if there is no other option for them? And those children who live in the orphanages or even themselves, those internees themselves, they give their consent or they agree to work, to do some work in order just for food sometimes, And if they refuse, they are very often subjected to punishment. So we do not have really physical punishment. So most often it's kind of some kind of medication given to them or medical preparations. There are different aspects. In the boarding schools, in the orphanages, specialized in ordinary, the sexual life starts very early, at the age of 13 or 14. We were talking about the Cathodic boarding school orphanage in Odessa region. They said this is a normal thing, which you can come across very often. Since they do not have special education, especially if you're talking about hygienic or whatever, pregnancy is a very often case there, which is not something which their principal wishes to have. If you are talking about the violation on the part of the personnel, very often again it's being done. I mean, it's not raping, but it's not either voluntary consent given by those who are going to be violated. I mean, subject to violence. Some of the students of this orphanage, she told us that there is some kind of, let's say, sexual attacks on part of the personnel. She told the principal about that, but there was no response. So, and accordingly, the principals do not do nothing about that. And there are a lot of those who never complain. You know, if we're talking about the mixed type of orphanages or boarding schools, and Erik already mentioned, and actual, let's say, I mean, the sexual relations is a normal thing between women and men, but not always we can see that they are voluntary, based on voluntary, so to say, consent. And it's better for some of the young women to have one partner among the boys than to be a victim of many attacks of different men. And again, 50% of those money they are paid, they spent to buy the condoms, let's say, or something, contraception. And speaking about sterilization, we do not have some specific proofs of evidence. First of all, nobody is going to talk about that, but very often it was the case. Again, that this region went after the abortion. And the young woman would never be able to become pregnant again. According to the legislation, there is a possibility because the guardian can take a decision based on the disability or, let's say, mental retardedness. He can actually take some steps about this person. We need to have more specific monitoring in such institutions. Not only I'm talking about the money support, whatever, what is the condition of the building or the toilets. Sometimes they're in awful conditions, but also we are talking about the violation, abuse of human rights, which are not obvious sometimes, which can be latent, so to say, but it doesn't mean that there are no human rights violations in such cases. So as a result, we have to switch over from the institutional care to the community care to be given to them in the community. Over the last few years, I visited 33 institutions, so-called the freedom places. I met with very good principals, heads of the orphanages, but I've never seen a good building of this orphanage. Thank you.
Доброго дня.
Good morning. First of all, I'd like to welcome my associates with for such a profound investigation. I think that your 3 years of work will bring us to some result. We as a country, the government, should think about this situation and start doing something in the direction of deinstitutionalization. Such institutions do not have right to exist. Our organization did not participate in the investigation, and we have never visited these institutions, but we have over 5 years of experience of working with the graduates, and we also developed a plan for institution transformation in Zhytomyr region, together with the Social Servant League. The conclusions that you made have confirmation by our results. The graduates talk about violations and abuse, and there is no mechanism to complain when you are kept in the institution. There is no contacts with external links to communicate. And even if there are some visits from foreign organizations or public servants, the information is not considered seriously, and there is almost no serious investigations. There are some abuse cases, and in Zhytomyr region we have seen teenagers living in a dormitory and there can be 15 or 20 children in one room. It's absolutely improbable not to have abuse and violation, not to have violence in the room where a dozen teenagers is constantly kept, and it applies also to the sexual violence. We must think about some new mechanisms to provide the children still kept in the institution an opportunity to communicate, to complain about any violence cases, for have those cases investigated. Next topic already mentioned, we must reform this institution's systems very quickly. We are in bad need to speed up this reform, because this institution's structure not only supports human rights abuse, it ruins the future for the children who are kept in the institutions, and this structure is inadequately expensive for the country. A year in the institution costed 100 to 120,000 hryvnias per child. Just imagine what does it mean to support a child if the child is kept in the community. There are 3 social workers per child. Just imagine 3 people coming to a mother having disabled child in the community. Even 1 social worker who comes every day will be immensely helpful for such a mother, for such a family. We must develop social services, which is not provided, unfortunately, by the state budget. The government is doing nothing to develop these social services on the level of community, to reach every family with the disabled children, to support them from the government, to provide them with the networking opportunities. Next topic. Who is kept in the institutions today? According to our experience, a major part of the children kept in the orphanages and boarding schools, up to 60% of these children and teenagers, except for the boarding schools for the disabled children, should not be kept there. They are kept in the institution just as the result of formal approach to vacancies in these institutions. There is no other reason to keep them there. We have seen a dozen of statements on general environment investigations written by the same hand on the same paper. It means that nobody actually have ever looked at the real life situation. The parents just have been forced to make these statements, motivated by apparently good situation in the institutions. If we are talking about children not being disabled, when they graduate from the institutions, they are not adequately prepared for independent life. At 18 years of age, the teenager is not needed by anybody. Nobody thinks about this child, about this teenager, as long as he or she does not come to get a welfare or violate the law. Nobody thinks what can become from a child kept in the institution for a dozen years. It's very important to prepare these children and teenagers for regular life. Just imagine a child whose day has been planned from the morning to the night. Everything was planned. Waking up, taking meals, being taught, and immediately after the teenager has graduated from the institution, is not prepared. He's set free, but he's not prepared for unplanned life, for the life without any schedules, without tutors telling him or her what to do and when to do it. So when such a person gets to the real life, he or she is lost. They do not understand what to do with their life, and they become involved in, let's say, a negative phenomenon. In the framework of our project, we have prepared the standard for social integration of the institution's graduate, but it's still not adopted because there is no clear state policy about their involvement in the community. The last topic. We often speak about deinstitutionalization, and our regular consideration is that we just cannot do anything for the institutions where the disabled children are kept. A general opinion is that these children cannot be kept in the family, but I think it's not right. It's discrimination and an abuse of the disabled person's rights. Good morning, I'm Larysa Samsonova, chairperson of the Family NGO. We have been here for 15 years, and we are developing the social services on the community level, still absent at the governmental level. We have spared no effort. In so doing, we tried to develop the governmental public services, but we still had no success. Some public servants listened to us, but we are still in the beginning of our way. We have established rehabilitation centers for disabled children, the children similar to those you have seen at the screens. They are physically and mentally disabled, and unfortunately, the children like this are born more often than before. A UNICEF investigation of children's rights abuse has shown how many institutions are there in Ukraine. The statistical data is as follows. There is 967 children orphanages still there from ex-Soviet times. They belong to the Ministry of Public Health, Ministry of Social Protection, Ministry of Education, and our disabled children go to the institutions belonging to the Ministry of Social Protection, where there is no psychological support, adequate study, where the skills necessary for independent life are not being developed. These institutions are very closed, and the children with severe disabilities have very seldom leave their rooms. One half of these children have parents. What does it mean? Their parents are blamed that their children are kept in the institutions, but they enter the institutions because their parents have no public support, no governmental support. They are disoriented when a disabled child is born, and the infant period is the most important to develop these children. The parents badly need the psychological support and help. They need knowledge how to live with a disabled child, how to build their life, how to restructure their life, not to affect other members of the family, and there is absolutely no support from the part of the government. It could have been possible if an early involvement institution had started to be active in Ukraine. What we need is team support, not only medical support, but also social and psychological support. When the parents are at lost, it is often used, or should I say abused, by the doctors. They invent new treatment methods, they promise to provide care, but as a matter of fact, that time is usually lost when a child could have been developed. when in some years it appears that the treatment was not successful, the parents are at loss again. The legislation about the disabled children involvement are rather good, but there is also a human factor. You see, nobody is willing to have these children in the kindergartens and primary schools. It means that we have no support system for the schools and kindergartens. The disabled children are transferred back home, and one of the parents is actually kept home with the disabled child for 24 hours a day. It creates tension in the family. It's not clear how to plan the life, and at that point an institution, a boarding school, is offered with allegedly good conditions where apparently good people work, and it appears that the family makes such an unpleasant decision to transfer a child into the boarding school, into the institution, being actually pushed by the state. Our dream is to get support for disabled children from early infant months for the rest of the life. The funds that the government provides should be addressed specifically to the children who need these funds, to prevent transferring these children to closed institutions, to prevent parents from cruel choice, from facing a cruel choice. It could have been possible if the government have made calculations, if the government have known how many disabled children are there, how much does it cost to support these children. We should create the mechanism when the money pursues the child in need, not being sent to institution. We also should have the social demand mechanism providing delegation of rights to the non-governmental organization, because we do know how to do it. Good morning, esteemed colleagues, the press. I represent the international organization Hope and Homes for Children, which is active in 8 countries and whose objective is to rule out the institutional care of the children. Despite all the scientific proofs of disadvantages of institutional care, despite all the proofs provided by our colleagues, the Ukrainian society still have a public opinion stating that the boarding school, the institutions are not the best, but the only possible way to care for such children. For instance, in public opinion, up to 58% of the respondents think that the institutions are right. Our legislators visit foreign countries, but they are incapable of reflecting international experience to Ukraine. I have been with this organization for 16 years, and I keep hearing the words like the institutions are there and they are needed, or we should do nothing, they will become obsolete by themselves. And another argument that we hear now is that the reform is not on time. Let's compare our experience with the foreign experience. One of the countries who was famous for their efforts for the institutional care system was Romania, because it was one of the prerequisites for them joining the European Union. Romania, in the 15 years, has made a long way, and now they have just 8,000 children in the institutions instead of 150,000. The same applies to Bulgaria. They had 16,000 children kept in the institution 10 years ago, and now they have just 2,000. And they have a strict strategy of deinstitutionalization, the transition from institution-based to family-based system for disabled children, and they support the development of family keeping structure. So we have the experience and we have all the opportunities to learn. There is some experience in Ukraine already. It's the experience of organizations like family organization that Larysa Samsonova presented. There are many other non-governmental organizations, many examples that we should promote and unite in a unified system. We have been in Ukraine with our projects for deinstitutionalization since 2006, and we are working now on implementation of this project in Dnipropetrovsk and Kiev region. We have established a model for transferring children from the closed institutions to the families. This process is linked to the social protection structure reforms in the region. We have already some best practices of working with each child individually. We studied the needs for our target groups and the communities in order to create and offer the services needed by the children and the families in these communities. On the basis of our analysis and cooperation with local governmental agencies, we have created a service design aimed at prevention of taking children from their parents. One of the strategic directions of the development for orphans is the family-based structure. However, the government doesn't provide anything more than funds to support them. Our system was oriented on the institutions, the graduates, for the people who do not know how to build their relations in the society they live in. The services are different for each region with consideration with the demand of local community. One of the services
we have to take into consideration the circumstances. We have to take away the child from family if something is endangering his or her life. And also we have to provide necessary rehabilitation measures and return this child to the family. Again, we have to anticipate, so to say, the situation. We have to provide help in crisis, critical situation. Also, if we are talking about family supporting service, the consultation for the parents, how to bring up and educate the children, the development of children in group, especially we are talking about preschool age children, individual consultation of the highest skilled experts, and again, early interference intervention service, I would say, especially we are talking about the disabled children under 7 years of age, in order to help the parents to draw up the program of development of their child, to help to give some advice, etc. And the group house is an example of alternative care for children. When a child is not yet part of the family, but is plunged into circumstances which were close to family life. And again, we have to provide the individual care for each child and system of mentorship, and their life is constructed very close to the model of family. Again, target-oriented help or assistance among those children who are orphans. When they become and they graduate from those institutions, they have to come back to the society, they have to find a job, whatever they require. Of course, this doesn't exhaust the list of the services. This can be of different type, and of course, ideally, those services have to be provided both by the public and especially non-public or let's say citizen organizations, if there will be a special order for that. Individual approach to each situation in orphanage or the boarding school. The situation is that one and the same decision to all. This cannot be so. It cannot be applied to every child. I mean, the one and the same approach or decision. We cannot achieve anything by that. And we have to provide the individual approach to each individual situation. When a person has some critical situation, and there is some reason for that, and our efforts must be targeted to overcome those circumstances. Of course, we have to take into consideration economic, let's say, economic aspects. We had to demonstrate that at all the levels, and today we have some stakeholders in those interested in some of the territories who are interested in to develop such services badly needed by their respective communities. But we've been fighting for several years to get some response from cabinet ministers, and our major adversary in this is the Minister of Finance. The issue of cost effectiveness is not interested in them because they do calculation as a committee, but how efficient or effective this could be for the country, this is beyond their scope of interest. Again, a very strong and powerful bureaucracy. Let's say, we are used to live the way we used to live, we do not want to change anything. So what we have to do in order to provide changes on the national level, to introduce the European standards to protect the children's rights, we have to recognize that children are top priority. When previously it was recognized in some of our strategic documents, but today none of the documents has any mention of that. The priority to protect the children. It's not recognized that the function of the state is to provide support to the parents to educate and bring up their children, and not just pay out some social payments or, let's say, support, and the parents themselves have to take care of that. We have to take care of this deinstitutionalization and to provide step-by-step, stage-by-stage, let's say, transfer to another attitude to provide to ensure the protection of children's rights. We have to have the political will, which is not there. Neither president nor the government has this political will. What I would like to say, we do not have the openness of the state government and the ability to say we are sorry, we have please, we have to apologize. Some time ago, one of the country government actually apologized for their public when their children they were away from taken from their own parents and were put into the families in England. And there is a report, Ryan report, Judge Ryan report, when the country itself decided to investigate the cases of violation in some of the orphanages or boarding schools. And first of all, we were talking about the Catholic Orphanages. More than 100 people were studied for a big lapse of time, and what the complaints they had. And the country, the state itself became the initiator for that, and this became the impetus, the push towards the transformations and changes and embarking on the road of different approaches to resolve this problem. So we have to say we are sorry, we have to recognize our own mistakes and errors, and not to adapt ourselves to the system, what is the case today. We try to change, let's say, the plaques on the walls or whatever. We try to do something, to inject something in the existing institutions, whatever. And they recently had a case that they decided to reform the boarding school, but they try to do that to preserve the let's say the places for the orphans, 11 persons, and providing possibility for the other people, normal people, to come to the same school because they do not have any other school. Maybe it would be necessary to build a normal ordinary school which is badly required by the local community. We are running out of time. We have just some questions, time for some questions. Well, actually, talking about the public organizations, they have to unite within the framework of the campaign. We try to open the door for children in order to provide the systemic changes, transformations in this realm. 17 different organizations, regional level organizations, should unite to make it possible in the future. Thank you. And thank you very much, dear experts, for this description and in-depth actual description of the situation. Maybe there are some questions in the audience or some specifications. If none, thank you very much indeed for your efforts, and we do hope we are going to see you again in the premises of this Ukrainian Crisis Media Center. And next briefing we are going to have in 10 minutes the OSCE report.